That morning, Caleb Dawson believed his biggest responsibility was getting his 9-year-old son, Miles, to school on time for his first music performance. Instead, a simple breakfast turned into a public humiliation when Sheriff Harrison Cole accused him of suspicious behavior and arrested him without ever checking the ID Caleb repeatedly offered. But Caleb chose calm over anger, dignity over pride, because he understood that sometimes the truth is revealed not by what powerful people say, but by what they choose to do when they believe no one important is watching. What happened after one unexpected phone call would force an entire town to confront the price of silence, the weight of prejudice, and the extraordinary courage of ordinary people who finally decided to tell the truth. Morning sunlight spilled across the surface of Cedar Lake, turning the water into a sheet of pale gold as the little diner slowly filled with the familiar rhythm of forks against plates, coffee mugs meeting wooden tables, and neighbors greeting one another by name. Outside, pickup trucks lined Main Street. Inside, the smell of fresh bacon and buttered toast wrapped around every conversation. Caleb Dawson sat quietly at the window with his 9-year-old son, Miles. A stack of pancakes sat untouched between them, while Miles carefully polished an old silver pocket watch with the corner of his napkin. "Think it'll bring me luck today?" the boy asked, grinning. Caleb smiled, though the tiredness beneath his eyes never quite disappeared. "It already has," he said. "It reminds you to breathe." Miles nodded and slipped the watch carefully into the pocket of his blue jacket. In less than an hour, he would be standing on his elementary school stage for his first music performance. Caleb had promised he wouldn't miss a second of it. The waitress topped off Caleb's coffee. "You two pick the best seat in the house." Miles looked out the wide window toward the lake. "I like seeing the ducks." Caleb chuckled softly. "So do I." The bell above the entrance rang. Conversations faded almost instantly. Heavy boots crossed the hardwood floor with slow confidence. Sheriff Harrison Cole had arrived. His pressed uniform caught the morning light while 2 deputies lingered near the entrance without saying a word. Cole scanned the room, then fixed his eyes on Caleb's table. He walked straight toward it. "You'll need to move." The diner became strangely quiet. Caleb looked up, confused but calm. "I'm sorry?" "That's my table." Caleb glanced around. The waitress frowned from behind the counter. "I seated him there, Sheriff." Cole ignored her. "I said move." Caleb folded his napkin beside his plate before speaking again. "My son has to be at school soon. We're almost finished." "I wasn't asking." Miles looked between the 2 men, his small hand slowly tightening around the edge of the table. Caleb's voice never changed. "This is a public restaurant. If the owner wants us to leave, we'll leave. Otherwise, we'd like to finish breakfast." A few customers exchanged uneasy glances. An older man near the coffee station quietly muttered, "Funny. I sat there Tuesday." No one laughed. Cole leaned closer. "License?" Caleb blinked once. "For breakfast? For identification? Have I broken a law?" Cole's jaw hardened. "You've been asking too many questions." Caleb slowly rested both hands on the tabletop where everyone could see them. "I'm happy to cooperate if you tell me why." Instead of answering, Cole nodded toward one of the deputies. "Suspicious behavior." The words landed over the room like cold rain. Miles looked at his father. "Dad." "It's okay," Caleb said gently, without taking his eyes off the sheriff. The younger deputy hesitated. "Sir, do it." Metal clicked. Several people lowered their heads toward their coffee instead of looking. Others quietly reached beneath the table for their phones. Caleb stood without resisting. "My wallet is in my right jacket pocket," he said calmly. "If you need identification, that's where you'll find it." Cole never reached for it. Instead, he pulled Caleb's hands behind his back. The cuffs closed with a sharp snap that echoed through the diner. Miles gasped. As he hurried around the chair toward his father, the old pocket watch slipped from his jacket. It struck the tile floor with a dull metallic crack before spinning in a slow circle. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. The watch finally stopped. Miles stared at it, frozen. Caleb looked down only long enough to meet his son's frightened eyes. "It's okay," he whispered. "Leave it." The sheriff removed Caleb's phone from his jacket. "I'll hold on to this." At that exact moment, the screen lit up. No caller name, no number, only a secure incoming call. Cole smirked. Perfect timing. He answered without asking permission. Yeah? A calm, unfamiliar voice came through the speaker. Why are you holding Caleb Dawson's personal phone? Sheriff Harrison Cole frowned, glancing at the screen before lifting the phone closer to his ear. And who exactly is asking? The voice did not answer immediately. Instead, it replied with measured patience. Please hand the phone back to Mr. Dawson. Cole let out a short laugh. He's a little busy. Caleb stood quietly beside him, his wrists still locked behind his back. He didn't interrupt. He simply watched Miles, whose eyes had drifted from the cracked pocket watch on the floor to his father's face. Everything Caleb wanted to say to his son fit into a single look. Stay calm. Breathe. I'm still here. The line remained silent for another second. Very well, the caller finally said. We'll speak again. The call disconnected. Cole slipped the phone into his own pocket, as though nothing unusual had happened. You've got important friends, he muttered. Caleb answered, without raising his voice. Everyone deserves to answer their own phone. Cole ignored him. Walk! The deputies led Caleb toward the diner entrance while Miles hurried behind them. Dad! Caleb turned just enough to smile. You're okay, buddy. But your hands... I'll be fine. Outside, a cool breeze drifted in from the lake. The early morning sun reflected off the water while traffic rolled lazily down Main Street, unaware that the quiet breakfast had become the center of everyone's attention. Inside the diner, nobody returned to eating. The waitress stood frozen beside the coffee machine. An elderly couple exchanged worried glances. A teenager quietly lowered the phone he'd been using to record. No one stepped forward. 12 hours earlier, the tiny duplex Caleb rented in Milwaukee was filled with the smell of cinnamon oatmeal before sunrise. Miles sat at the kitchen table, wearing mismatched socks while practicing the trumpet finger positions he'd memorized for today's school performance. You don't have to keep checking the clock, he laughed. I'm not checking the clock. You checked 3 times, Caleb smiled. I like being early. Miles rolled his eyes. You like being an hour early. That's different. Their laughter briefly filled the kitchen, pushing away the silence that had settled into the house ever since Renee passed away 2 years earlier. Near the sink rested a stack of unopened medical bills Caleb hadn't found the courage to throw away. He quietly slid them beneath an old notebook before Miles could notice. On the table lay a silver pocket watch with a worn leather strap. The watch had belonged to Miles's grandfather, a firefighter who believed every emergency could be made smaller if someone stayed calm long enough to think. Caleb carefully replaced the cracked strap he'd repaired the night before. There, he handed it to Miles. It still works. The boy opened the cover and listened. Tick, tick, tick. It sounds louder. That's because you're listening. Miles slipped it into his jacket pocket. I'll carry it on stage. So every time you're nervous, Caleb said, kneeling beside him, remember what Grandpa used to say. Miles smiled before answering with him. As long as it's ticking. There's still time to make the right choice. Caleb nodded proudly. Before they left the house, his phone vibrated. Another message appeared. The third one since dawn. Don't miss the 8 a.m. call. Director Hayes will contact you directly. Caleb read it once before locking the screen. Miles looked up. Work? For a minute. Will it make us late? Caleb rested a gentle hand on his son's shoulder. Nothing is going to make me miss your performance. He believed those words with all his heart. Neither of them knew that breakfast in Cedar Lake would test that promise before the morning was over. The drive north had begun before sunrise, with soft country music humming through the truck speakers and the first streaks of daylight stretching across Wisconsin farmland. Miles leaned against the passenger window, tracing shapes in the fogged glass while Caleb followed the quiet 2-lane highways toward Cedar Lake. You've never been here before? Miles asked. Caleb smiled without taking his eyes off the road. First time. So why this town? Just checking on a project. What kind of project? The kind that helps people when they have nowhere else to turn. Miles accepted the answer with the easy trust only a child could give. As they entered town, Cedar Lake looked exactly like hundreds of small Midwestern communities. Brick storefronts lined Main Street. American flags hung from old lampposts. A church bell echoed somewhere beyond the trees. On the surface, everything looked peaceful. Caleb slowed beside the community center. A faded banner read, "Emergency Relief Program, serving every family." He studied the building for a moment before writing something inside the small notebook he always carried in his jacket pocket. Miles noticed, "You write everything down." "It helps me remember what I actually saw." A few blocks later, they passed stacks of unused generators sitting behind a locked storage fence, their plastic covers still wrapped around them despite records showing they had supposedly been distributed months earlier. Caleb didn't say anything. He simply made another note. His organization had funded emergency preparedness programs across dozens of towns. Most reports were routine. Cedar Lake wasn't. For nearly 6 months, financial records, supply inventories, and citizen complaints refused to line up. Equipment listed as delivered couldn't be located. Families approved for assistance insisted they had never received it. Nothing proved fraud by itself, but too many small questions had begun pointing toward the same place. Caleb wasn't there to accuse anyone. He wasn't even an investigator. His job was to quietly verify facts before recommending whether federal auditors should look deeper. That was all. A red light forced him to stop near the town square. On the sidewalk ahead, an elderly man struggled beside a battered wheelchair. One front wheel refused to turn. Cars rolled around him without slowing. Caleb pulled over. "We've got 10 minutes, he said. Miles grinned. "That's enough." Together, they walked over. "Morning, sir," Caleb said. The old man looked embarrassed. Wheel locked up again. Without hesitation, Caleb knelt on the cold pavement. Years of fixing broken things around his own house had taught him enough to recognize the problem immediately. A bent metal bracket had jammed against the wheel axle. He searched the truck for a small wrench. Within minutes, the wheel rolled freely again. "There you go." The old man's eyes softened. "Name's Amos." "Caleb." Amos looked toward the temporary parking permit displayed inside Caleb's windshield. "You visiting?" "For a little while." Amos nodded slowly, then lowered his voice. "If you're asking questions around here." He glanced toward the sheriff's office across the street. "Don't let Sheriff Harrison Cole know who you are." Caleb paused. "Why's that?" Amos forced a tired smile that never reached his eyes. "Because around here, some people get answers." He looked across the street again. "And some people become the question." For the first time that morning, Caleb felt something heavier than curiosity settle in his chest. He thanked Amos, climbed back into the truck with Miles, and pulled toward the lakeside diner. Across the street, through the windshield, a patrol SUV slowly rolled into the sheriff's parking lot. Behind the wheel sat Harrison Cole, watching. His patrol SUV remained parked across the street long after Caleb and Miles disappeared inside the lakeside diner. Cole rested one hand on the steering wheel, saying nothing as people greeted one another through the restaurant windows. He watched the waitress lead the father and son to the second table beside the lake, the same table he claimed every Friday morning without ever having reserved it. Inside, the atmosphere felt warm enough to make anyone forget the cool Wisconsin air outside. Helen Brooks, the owner, smiled as she poured fresh coffee. "First time here?" Caleb nodded. "Passing through." "Then you picked the right place." She pointed toward the window. "Best view in town." Miles pressed his face toward the glass. "You can see ducks and the police station." Caleb followed his son's gaze. Directly across the street stood the Cedar Lake Sheriff's Office, a brick building with 2 patrol cars parked out front. He quietly opened his notebook beneath the edge of the menu. Not to spy, not to investigate, only to record simple observations, exactly as he had done in dozens of towns before. Breakfast arrived a few minutes later. Scrambled eggs, bacon, toast still steaming. Miles reached immediately for the syrup. "You nervous about today?" Caleb asked. "A little." "You'll do great." "What if I miss a note?" Caleb smiled. "Then you play the next one." Miles laughed. "You always say that, because it's true." For a brief moment, the morning felt normal again. Then the bell over the front door rang. Conversation around the diner softened almost instantly. Helen's smile faded. Sheriff Harrison Cole stepped inside without looking at anyone else. Deputy Travis Boone followed several feet behind him, broad-shouldered and expressionless. The younger deputy, Noah Bennett, entered last, carrying himself with the awkward stiffness of someone still trying to grow into a new uniform. Cole's eyes settled immediately on Caleb. He didn't glance around the room. He didn't ask whether another table was open. He walked straight toward the window. Every footstep echoed against the old hardwood floor. When he reached the table, he stopped. "You're sitting in my seat." Caleb looked up calmly. "I'm sorry." "My table." Helen quickly stepped forward. "Sheriff, I seated them." Cole never turned toward her. "I wasn't talking to you." The room became painfully quiet. Caleb folded his napkin beside his plate. "We're almost finished." "I don't care." Miles looked at his father, confused. Caleb's voice remained steady. "If this table is reserved, nobody told us." "It doesn't have to be." Cole rested one hand on the back of the empty chair. "People around here know better." An elderly customer near the pie display finally spoke. "Funny thing." Everyone looked toward him. "I had breakfast at this very table last Tuesday." Cole ignored him completely. The old man lowered his eyes. No one else spoke. Cole looked Caleb up and down, taking in the worn jacket, faded jeans, and work boots. "What do you do?" "I work with a nonprofit." "What kind?" "We help communities prepare for emergencies." Cole smirked. "Doesn't pay much, does it?" "It pays enough." A few nervous chuckles drifted through the room, though no one looked comfortable laughing. Cole leaned a little closer. "You don't look like much of a government man." Caleb met his eyes. "I never said I worked for the government." The answer seemed to irritate Cole even more. Miles quietly reached into his pocket and wrapped his fingers around his grandfather's old watch. Its soft ticking felt louder than the silence around them. Caleb noticed, but said nothing. He simply gave his son a reassuring smile. Then he looked back at the sheriff. "Is there a reason you're asking me all this?" Cole's expression hardened. "There is now." Without taking his eyes off Caleb, he turned slightly toward the youngest deputy. "Noah." The rookie stepped forward. "Yes, Sheriff?" Cole's voice carried clearly enough for everyone in the diner to hear. "Turn your body camera on." Noah hesitated for barely a second. Then a small green light blinked to life. The tiny camera on his chest began recording, capturing every face in the diner, every word, every uneasy silence. Sheriff Harrison Cole folded his arms. "Now," he said, "let's try this again." He looked directly at Caleb. Identification. Caleb rested both palms on the table, careful to make every movement slow enough that no one could misunderstand it. "My wallet is in my right jacket pocket." Cole didn't move. "It contains my driver's license." Still nothing. "If you'd like to verify who I am," Caleb continued calmly, "you're welcome to retrieve it." Miles stared at his father. "Dad," Caleb gave him a reassuring nod. "It's all right." Cole's eyes narrowed. "You've got an answer for everything." "No," Caleb replied. "Just for the questions you've asked." Several customers exchanged glances. The older man who had spoken earlier shifted uncomfortably in his booth. Helen Brooks remained frozen beside the coffee station, one hand still gripping the pot she had forgotten to set down. Cole took one slow step closer. "I think you're watching my station." Caleb looked through the window toward the brick building across the street before returning his gaze to the sheriff. "I've looked out the window." "Exactly. So has everyone else in this room." A faint smile almost reached Noah's face before he quickly hid it. Cole noticed. His expression hardened. "What business do you have in Cedar Lake?" "I'm passing through." "Passing through for what?" "Breakfast." A nervous laugh escaped from somewhere near the counter, but it disappeared almost instantly. Cole wasn't amused. "I don't believe you," Caleb answered quietly. "You don't have to believe me." The sheriff leaned forward until only inches separated them. "I think you're hiding something." Caleb met his eyes without raising his voice. "Then check my identification." The sentence lingered in the room. Everyone heard it. Everyone watched. Cole never reached for the wallet Caleb had offered 3 separate times. Instead, He spoke loud enough for Noah's camera to capture every syllable. People like you always act calm right before things go bad. Silence settled over the diner. No one needed the sentence explained. Miles looked down at his plate. His small shoulders tightened. Caleb noticed immediately. His own disappointment wasn't for himself. It was for the little boy who was hearing words no child should have to carry. He spoke gently. Miles. The boy looked up. Remember what we talked about. Breathe? Breathe. Miles nodded slowly. Cole snapped his fingers toward Travis Boone. Get him up. Travis stepped forward. Stand. Caleb rose without resistance. I'm not resisting. I didn't ask. My wallet is still in my right pocket. Again, Cole ignored him. The metal cuffs appeared in Travis's hands. For the first time, Noah spoke. Sheriff, Cole didn't even turn. Cuff him. The steel closed around Caleb's wrists with a sharp click, not painfully, but firmly enough that everyone in the room understood. This had gone much farther than a disagreement over a breakfast table. Miles hurried around the chair. Dad! As he reached for him, the silver pocket watch slipped from his jacket. It struck the tile floor. The cover sprang open. Tick, tick, tick. The tiny sound seemed impossibly loud inside the silent diner. Miles instinctively bent to pick it up. Caleb shook his head. Leave it there, buddy. The boy froze. His eyes filled, but he obeyed. Caleb knew exactly why. If Miles stepped between him and the deputies now, the moment could become even more frightening. Cole reached into Caleb's jacket himself. Instead of removing the wallet Caleb had pointed out over and over, he pulled out Caleb's cell phone. You won't be needing this. Caleb looked at the phone. Then at Noah's steadily blinking camera. He said nothing. Not because he had run out of words, because he had suddenly realized something. Every warning in the anonymous reports, every complaint about unfair treatment, every unexplained stop, every accusation made without evidence. It was unfolding exactly as those reports had described. If he revealed who he was now, everything would end with an apology. But if he stayed silent, the truth would belong to the camera instead of to him. Outside, Travis guided Caleb toward the diner door. Just as they stepped onto the sidewalk, Caleb saw a familiar figure across the parking lot. Amos. The old man's wheelchair suddenly lurched sideways. One wheel caught the broken edge of the pavement. At that exact moment, a delivery truck slowly began backing toward him. Its reverse alarm echoed through the parking lot. Beep, beep, beep. The driver couldn't see Amos behind the truck's tall cargo box. The old man's wheelchair leaned farther toward the curb, one hand desperately gripping the armrest while the damaged wheel refused to turn. Caleb reacted before anyone else. Stop the truck, he shouted. The driver never heard him. Travis Boone tightened his grip on Caleb's arm. Keep walking. No! Caleb called again, louder this time. He's behind you! People standing outside the diner turned toward the sound, but for a brief second, no one moved. Miles saw the truck creeping backward. Mr. Amos! The little boy instinctively started running. Caleb stepped sideways, placing himself between Miles and the moving truck, despite the handcuffs binding his wrists behind his back. Stay back, buddy! With his hands restrained, Caleb couldn't reach Amos himself. Instead, he threw his shoulder against the truck's steel side panel as hard as he could. The loud bang startled the driver. The brakes slammed. The truck stopped only a few feet from Amos's wheelchair. The parking lot fell silent. Amos looked up, breathing hard. Thank you. Caleb didn't answer him. He looked toward Noah instead. Please, he said evenly. Help him. Sheriff Cole's expression darkened. Leave him. Noah glanced at Amos, then at Caleb, finally at the sheriff. He could get hurt. I gave you an order. The rookie deputy hesitated, the tiny green light on his body camera still blinking steadily. For the first time that morning, he made a choice for himself. Ignoring Cole's command, Noah hurried across the pavement and steadied the wheelchair before helping Amos back onto the sidewalk. A murmur spread through the crowd. Someone whispered, "The kid did the right thing." Cole shot Noah a look that promised the conversation wasn't over. Meanwhile, Miles bent down to retrieve his grandfather's pocket watch. A thin crack now stretched across the glass. He stared at it sadly. Before he could slip it back into his pocket, Caleb spoke. "Miles?" The boy looked up. "Give it to Mr. Amos." Miles blinked. "But Grandpa's watch." "I know." The boy swallowed hard. Then he carefully placed the old watch into Amos's trembling hands. The elderly man looked confused. "I can't take this." "It's only until you're feeling better," Miles said quietly. Amos closed his fingers around the warm silver case. Its faint ticking continued beneath his weathered palm. Tears gathered in his eyes. "You too?" he whispered. "You're worried about me after everything that's happened to you." Caleb smiled gently. "We're all neighbors for a little while." Those words hung in the morning air. Several people standing near the diner lowered their phones. Others quietly lifted them again, this time making sure Noah, Amos, and the stopped truck were all in the frame. Inside the restaurant, Helen Brooks unlocked the security monitor beneath the register without anyone noticing. Outside, Sheriff Cole looked increasingly irritated. This little show is over. He reached into Caleb's jacket and pulled out the cell phone again. At that precise moment, the screen lit up. 7:59 a.m. 1 minute before the scheduled call. The phone vibrated once, then again. Cole glanced at the secure notification flashing across the display. No caller ID, no company logo, only one line of text. Secure incoming connection in 60 seconds. Caleb said nothing. He simply watched the seconds disappear from the corner of the screen while the old pocket watch continued ticking softly in Amos's hands. Across the parking lot, Noah looked from the phone to Caleb, then back to the blinking camera on his own chest. Somewhere deep inside, he began to realize that this morning was becoming much bigger than a dispute over a breakfast table. The digital clock above the diner's entrance changed. 8 a.m. Caleb's phone began to ring. The sound cut through the parking lot with surprising clarity. Everyone seemed to notice it at once. Sheriff Harrison Cole looked down at the screen. There was still no name, no company logo, only the words, "Secure incoming call." A faint smile crossed his face. "Let's see who's so eager to talk to you." Without asking permission, he swiped the screen. "Hello." The response came immediately, calm, professional, and unmistakably confident. "This is Director Malcolm Hayes. I need to speak with Caleb Dawson." Cole glanced sideways at Caleb before answering. "Mr. Dawson isn't available." A brief pause followed. "Who am I speaking with?" "Sheriff Harrison Cole." "Cedar Lake Sheriff's Office." Another measured silence. "Why are you answering Mr. Dawson's personal phone, Sheriff?" "Because your friend is currently being detained." The people standing nearby exchanged uncertain looks. Hayes spoke again, his voice never rising. "On what grounds?" Cole folded one arm across his chest. "Suspicious activity. Refusal to cooperate. Observing the sheriff's office." Caleb remained silent. He knew this conversation was no longer about him. It was becoming part of the record. Hayes continued. "Has Mr. Dawson threatened anyone?" "No." "Has he resisted?" "He refused lawful instructions." "Did he attempt to flee?" "No." "Did he identify where his identification could be found?" Cole hesitated, only for a heartbeat. "He hasn't identified himself." Caleb finally spoke. "My wallet is still in my right jacket pocket." Several people looked toward Cole. Helen Brooks stepped quietly onto the sidewalk, still wearing her apron. She had heard every word. Noah's body camera remained fixed on the sheriff. Its small green light blinked steadily. Hayes's voice returned. "Sheriff, has anyone actually checked his identification?" Cole's jaw tightened. "We're handling the situation." "That wasn't my question." For the first time since entering the diner, Harrison Cole looked genuinely uncomfortable. He answered carefully. "Not yet." Another pause. When Hayes spoke again, every word sounded deliberate. "Mr. Dawson and I have a scheduled briefing this morning regarding financial irregularities involving federally supported emergency relief grants." A ripple passed through the crowd. Cole frowned. "So? So his participation is expected?" Cole laughed quietly. "That doesn't give him special treatment." "No," Hayes replied. It doesn't. The answer surprised everyone. Not even Caleb reacted. Hayes continued in the same calm tone. It does, however, require me to document why an individual participating in a scheduled federal briefing is unable to answer his own phone. Cole's confidence slipped another inch. He's being lawfully detained. Very well. The director's voice became even more precise. Please confirm your location. Cedar Lake Diner, Main Street. Are body cameras operating? Noah instinctively touched the camera clipped to his vest. Yes. Is restaurant surveillance present? Helen answered before anyone else could. Yes. Cole shot her a sharp look. Hayes acknowledged her without hesitation. Thank you, ma'am. Then he addressed the sheriff one final time. Do not instruct anyone to disable recording devices. Do not interfere with any evidence related to this encounter. A federal evidence preservation team has been notified and is traveling to your location. The parking lot seemed to lose all sound. Even the gulls circling above the lake had drifted away. Cole's grip tightened around the phone. You think you're intimidating me? No, Hayes answered evenly. I'm reminding you that preserving evidence protects everyone, including you. The line went dead. For several seconds, nobody moved. Cole stared at the silent phone in his hand. He had expected an angry lawyer. He had expected a frightened supervisor. Instead, he had received a calm reminder that every decision made during the past 15 minutes might soon be examined far beyond Cedar Lake. He slowly lowered the phone. His eyes met Caleb's. Why didn't you tell me who you were? Caleb answered, without the slightest trace of triumph. Because I wanted you to decide how to treat me before you knew anything about my job. No one spoke. Noah lowered his eyes. Helen quietly wiped tears from the corner of one eye. Across the parking lot, Amos still held the cracked pocket watch, listening to its steady ticking. Tick, tick, tick. Sheriff Cole looked around and suddenly realized something that hadn't been true only minutes earlier. Every camera in sight was now pointed at him. His expression changed almost instantly. The confidence that had filled his voice inside the diner gave way to careful calculation. He looked at Caleb for several long seconds before speaking. Take the cuffs off. Travis Boone hesitated. But Sheriff, I said take them off. The steel clicked open. Caleb slowly rubbed one wrist where a faint red mark circled the skin. He didn't complain. He didn't glare. Instead, his first glance searched the crowd until he found Miles. The boy was standing beside Amos, trying to smile through frightened eyes. Caleb walked straight to him. You okay, buddy? Miles nodded once. I thought they were taking you away. Caleb rested a hand on his shoulder. I'm right here. Only then did he notice the pocket watch. The crystal across its face was cracked from edge to edge. Miles held it carefully. I'm sorry, Dad. Caleb took the watch gently, turning it over in his hand. The silver case bore years of scratches, but when he opened it, the tiny hands were still moving. Tick, tick, tick. He smiled softly. It still works. Miles let out the breath he'd been holding. So, Grandpa was right? As long as it's ticking, Caleb answered quietly. There's still time to make the right choice. Amos listened from only a few feet away, his eyes glistening. Cole cleared his throat loudly, trying to reclaim everyone's attention. This has been blown completely out of proportion. No one answered. He pointed toward Caleb. This man deliberately refused to identify himself. Caleb looked at him calmly. I told you 3 times where my wallet was. Cole ignored the remark. He misrepresented himself. I never claimed to be anyone other than Caleb Dawson. Cole's jaw tightened. For the first time that morning, several people openly shook their heads. Helen Brooks stepped outside, carrying a dish towel she had forgotten she was still holding. Sheriff, she said quietly, he never caused any trouble. Cole turned sharply. Helen, stay out of this. I watched the whole thing. You watched part of it. No, she replied. I watched all of it. Those words landed harder than she expected. Cole immediately shifted his attention. Travis? Yes, Sheriff. Search his truck. Caleb looked toward the pickup parked near the corner of the lot. You don't have my permission. I don't need it. Travis headed toward the vehicle. At the same time, Cole pointed toward Noah. Turn your body camera off. Noah looked down at the blinking green light. It uploads automatically. I gave you an order. I can't erase what's already been recorded. Cole stepped closer. You planning to make a career out of embarrassing your department? Noah swallowed. My job is to keep it recording. Silence followed. Cole stared at the young deputy, waiting for him to back down. He didn't. Without another word, Cole spun around and marched toward Caleb's truck himself. He opened the driver's door. Inside sat a notebook, a travel mug, Miles' backpack, a neatly folded jacket. Nothing else looked unusual. Travis searched beneath the seats, the glove compartment, the center console. He found registration papers, work gloves, a flashlight, and a folder containing maintenance reports from several small towns. No weapons, no surveillance equipment, no maps marked with police activity, nothing remotely resembling criminal intent. Cole grabbed the folder anyway. What's this? My work. For who? A nonprofit organization. You expect me to believe that? You don't have to believe me. Caleb's voice remained steady. You only have to read it. Cole never opened the folder. Instead, he slammed the truck door shut. Across the parking lot, Helen quietly slipped back inside the diner. She walked behind the front counter and unlocked the computer beneath the cash register. The security system was still recording. Without saying a word to anyone, she removed a small backup drive from its slot and slipped it into the pocket of her apron. Outside, Caleb looked down at the cracked watch once more before handing it back to Miles. Keep it safe. Miles nodded. I will. The father and son stood together in the morning sunlight while uncertainty settled over the parking lot once again. The handcuffs were gone, but the fight had only begun. Less than 3 hours later, televisions across Cedar Lake would display a headline that neither Caleb nor Miles saw coming. Federal consultant provokes sheriff during breakfast dispute. The story spread faster than the truth ever could. The video shown on local television began only after voices had already been raised. It showed Caleb standing beside the table, then the handcuffs, then the phone call. Missing were the first several minutes inside the diner. The questions, the ignored offer to check his wallet, and the quiet restraint that had marked every word Caleb spoke. By lunchtime, social media had already chosen sides. Some praised the sheriff for protecting the town. Others insisted Caleb had deliberately hidden his identity to embarrass local law enforcement. Very few asked what had happened before the cameras started rolling. Caleb drove Miles home in silence. Rain clouds had gathered over the highway, turning the afternoon gray. The cracked pocket watch rested in the cup holder between them. Neither of them reached for it. Finally, Miles broke the silence. Dad? Caleb glanced over. Yeah? Did you do something wrong? The question landed harder than the steel cuffs ever had. Caleb kept both hands on the steering wheel. No. Miles looked out the passenger window. Then why are people saying you did? For several miles, only the windshield wipers answered. I've learned something, Caleb finally said. What's that? Sometimes people only see the middle of a story. Miles frowned. And they think it's the whole story? Caleb nodded. They don't always know what happened before or after. Miles looked down at the broken watch. I don't like it. I don't either. But you always tell me to tell the truth. I do. So why doesn't that fix it? Caleb smiled sadly. Because truth isn't always the first thing people believe. That evening, Miles stood quietly at the back of his school's auditorium. The chairs were filling with parents holding flowers and cameras. His music teacher approached gently. We missed you this morning. Miles forced a small smile. I'm sorry. We'll make sure you get another chance. He nodded politely, but his thoughts were somewhere else. Across the room, two boys whispered while looking at a phone. That's him. The kid from the news. My dad said his father started a fight with the sheriff. Miles lowered his eyes. He wanted to explain. He wanted to shout that none of it was true. Instead, he quietly walked outside. Meanwhile, Caleb sat alone in a small federal office several counties away. Director Malcolm Hayes appeared on a secure video screen. You did the right thing by stepping back. It doesn't feel that way. It rarely does. Hayes folded his hands. If you stay involved now, every decision will be questioned. I know. So the investigation moves without you. Caleb nodded once. I won't interfere. Hayes hesitated. The sheriff's attorney has already issued a statement. Caleb wasn't surprised. What does it say? That you concealed your role, refused to cooperate, and used federal connections after provoking the incident. Caleb closed his eyes for a moment. Exactly what he had expected. They're trying to make this about me. They are. Hayes leaned closer. But evidence doesn't care who tells the story. After the meeting ended, Caleb remained alone in the quiet office. On the desk sat the cracked pocket watch. He had asked Miles to leave it with him for the afternoon. He carefully opened its silver cover. Tick, tick, tick. Still working. He thought about Renee. She used to tell him that being respected and being understood were two very different things. Tonight, he understood exactly what she meant. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Caleb looked toward the door. Standing outside was Noah Bennett. The young deputy looked exhausted. Rainwater dripped from his jacket. In one hand, he carried a plain black hard drive. When Caleb opened the door, Noah held it out without saying a word. Finally, he spoke. My body camera wasn't the only recording. He took a slow breath. And I think it's time someone saw everything. Noah Bennett placed the black hard drive on the conference table, as though it weighed far more than a few ounces. I copied it before anyone could touch the system, he said quietly. The department server uploads every body camera automatically. Sheriff Cole told me to turn mine off, but it was already backed up. Caleb didn't reach for the drive. Instead, he looked at the young deputy. You understand what this could cost you. Noah nodded. My badge. My career. My neighbors. He managed a tired smile. But if I stay quiet, it'll cost me something worse. Director Malcolm Hayes entered the room with two members of the federal evidence team. One technician carefully connected the drive to a secure laptop while another documented every step. No one spoke as the first video appeared. The recording began inside the diner. Unlike the television clip, this one started the moment Sheriff Cole walked through the front door. Every word was there. Helen telling Caleb he could sit wherever he liked. The older customer reminding everyone he had used the same table only days before. Caleb calmly offering the location of his wallet 3 separate times. The video showed Cole ignoring every opportunity to verify Caleb's identity. Then came the moment outside. Caleb warning the delivery truck. Caleb shielding Miles. Caleb asking Noah to help Amos before worrying about himself. The room remained silent until the recording ended. Hayes closed the laptop. That changes the entire timeline. It shows exactly what happened, Noah replied. It shows more than that, Hayes answered. It shows intent. Before anyone could continue, another knock sounded at the office door. Amos slowly entered, using his repaired wheelchair. In his lap rested a small cloth, wrapped carefully around something. I think this belongs here. He unfolded the fabric. Inside lay the cracked silver pocket watch. I couldn't keep it. Caleb smiled warmly. It helped you. It reminded me, Amos said softly. Some people still stop to help strangers. He placed the watch on the table. I'd like to help now. For the next hour, Amos described everything he had witnessed, beginning not with the arrest, but with the moment Caleb had stopped downtown to repair his wheelchair before breakfast. He didn't know my name. He didn't ask for anything. He just saw someone who needed help. Every statement was recorded, every detail carefully documented. As Amos finished, another unexpected visitor arrived. Helen Brooks. Still wearing the same blue apron from the diner, she held a small plastic evidence bag. I almost talked myself out of coming, she admitted. Hayes thanked her for making the trip. Helen took a deep breath. The sheriff asked for our security footage. She paused. But he never asked whether we had a backup. She slid a flash drive across the table. Our register records to a separate system. The technician immediately loaded the second recording. A different camera angle filled the screen. This one captured the entire confrontation from behind the counter. There were no blind spots, no missing seconds. Every customer, every word, every ignored offer to check Caleb's wallet, every glance exchanged around the room. When the recording reached the moment Cole ordered Noah to activate his body camera, Hayes stopped the video. The two recordings match perfectly. The technician nodded. Frame for frame. Before the meeting ended, the receptionist quietly stepped inside. There are more people waiting. Who? She looked down at her clipboard. A carpenter. A retired nurse. A school custodian. A mechanic. They all say the same thing. Hayes raised an eyebrow. What do they say? The receptionist answered softly. They believe what happened to Mr. Dawson happened to them too. As Caleb looked through the conference room window, he saw ordinary people filling the hallway one by one. Some held faded paperwork. Others carried photographs. One man clutched a worn toolbox. None of them had come to defend Caleb because of his job. They had come because for the first time in years, they believed someone might finally listen. Late that evening, investigators organizing the growing stack of evidence uncovered one financial document that immediately drew everyone's attention. A payment authorized from the town's emergency relief budget had been deposited into a construction company owned by Sheriff Cole's brother-in-law. The room fell silent as the investigators compared the payment with the town's inventory reports. According to the records, the money had been used to purchase emergency generators, portable heaters, and flood response equipment for low-income neighborhoods. But the warehouse inventory told a different story. Half the equipment had never arrived. The other half had been marked as distributed to families who insisted they had never received a single item. Director Malcolm Hayes slowly closed the file. This stopped being about one arrest a long time ago. No one argued. Within 48 hours, a formal federal review expanded beyond Caleb's encounter at the diner. Financial auditors, civil rights attorneys, and independent investigators arrived in Cedar Lake, each examining a different piece of the same puzzle. Sheriff Harrison Cole continued insisting he had done nothing improper. Standing outside the sheriff's office, surrounded by local reporters, he adjusted his badge before speaking. I treated Mr. Dawson exactly the way I'd treat anyone else. The statement appeared on every evening broadcast, but this time the evidence appeared beside it. The complete diner footage, Noah's body camera, Helen's backup recording, the timeline. The unanswered offers to check Caleb's identification. Public opinion began shifting one careful step at a time, not because someone famous defended Caleb, because ordinary people could finally see the entire story. Inside the sheriff's office, Travis Boone sat across from federal investigators. His hands trembled as they placed two reports in front of him. One was the report he had filed. The other was Noah's body camera footage. Every contradiction had been highlighted. You can help us understand how this happened, one investigator said quietly. For several long moments, Travis stared at the pages. Then his shoulders sank. It wasn't the first time. His voice barely rose above a whisper. He always decided first and wrote the report afterward. The confession continued for nearly 3 hours. Travis admitted that reports had been rewritten, complaints quietly dismissed, and citizens labeled uncooperative without evidence whenever doing so protected the department from criticism. He accepted responsibility for signing documents he knew were inaccurate. I told myself I was protecting the badge. He lowered his head. I was really protecting one man. Meanwhile, Noah returned to work under temporary supervision. Some officers refused to speak to him. Others quietly thanked him when no one else was watching. He understood that telling the truth had not instantly made him a hero. It had simply made him responsible for continuing to tell it. Across town, the community hall filled beyond capacity for a public hearing, unlike anything Cedar Lake had seen in decades. Residents lined up to speak. A retired nurse described emergency medication that never reached elderly patients. A carpenter held up receipts for tools confiscated during a traffic stop and never returned. A single mother explained how she had been denied winter heating assistance despite receiving approval months earlier. One story alone could be questioned. Dozens could not. Caleb sat in the back row beside Miles. He never asked to address the room. He simply listened. Late in the hearing, the town council chair approached him. Mr. Dawson, Caleb stood politely. We'd like to discuss compensation for what happened. Caleb looked around the crowded room. Then he shook his head. I'm not interested in being treated differently. The chairman looked surprised. You deserve restitution. I deserve fairness. He gestured toward the residents waiting patiently with folders in their hands. If this town restores my dignity but leaves theirs behind, he paused. Then nothing important has changed. The room remained perfectly still. Several people quietly wiped away tears. Miles looked at his father with an expression Caleb had never seen before. Not admiration, understanding. The chairman slowly nodded. We'll review every documented claim. Not because of me, Caleb answered gently, because they should have mattered before I ever came here. The meeting ended just before sunset. As father and son walked toward the parking lot, Miles carefully removed the cracked pocket watch from his jacket. It still ticks, Caleb smiled. So do good people. The next morning, the council announced an emergency public session. For the first time in 19 years, Sheriff Harrison Cole would be required to surrender his badge pending the outcome of a formal investigation. Before the hearing could begin, Miles quietly walked to the front of the chamber. Holding his grandfather's cracked pocket watch in both hands, he looked toward the council members. I'd like to say something, if that's okay. The room fell completely silent. The chairman of the council looked at Caleb. Caleb simply nodded. If Miles wants to speak, he said softly, that's his choice. The chairman stepped aside. Miles walked slowly to the microphone, both hands wrapped around his grandfather's silver pocket watch. The crack across its glass caught the morning light, but the tiny hands inside still moved with quiet determination. Tick, tick, tick. The little sound somehow reached farther than the microphone ever could. Miles swallowed. When all this started, he said, I thought the strongest person in the world was someone important enough that the FBI director would call their phone. He glanced toward his father. I don't think that anymore. No one moved. My dad told me that telling the truth doesn't always fix everything right away. He smiled sadly. I didn't believe him. A few people lowered their heads. I watched people look away while my dad was being handcuffed. His voice never rose. I was scared. He looked across the room until his eyes rested on Noah Bennett. But then I watched someone decide not to look away anymore. Noah quietly blinked back tears. Miles turned toward the council. My grandpa carried this watch when he was a firefighter. He lifted it carefully. My dad says, if it's still ticking, there's still time to make the right choice. He paused. I think towns are like that too. Silence filled the chamber. Not the silence of fear, the silence of people honestly listening. When Miles stepped away from the microphone, the room remained still for another long moment before quiet applause began near the back. It spread slowly, no cheering, no celebration, only gratitude. Later that afternoon, Sheriff Harrison Cole removed his badge in the same building where he had worn it with unquestioned authority for nearly 2 decades. The investigation would continue through the courts, and he would answer for his decisions through the legal process. Travis Boone accepted responsibility for signing reports he knew were false. Noah Bennett was not promoted. Instead, he spent the following year helping rebuild public trust by overseeing body camera training, evidence preservation, and community transparency under independent supervision. He understood that trust was earned one decision at a time. The town council voted unanimously to establish an independent review board for emergency relief funding and citizen complaints. Families whose applications had disappeared were contacted again. Equipment inventories were rebuilt from the ground up. People who had spent years believing no one would listen finally had someone asking questions. When officials later invited Caleb to lead the new Community Oversight Committee, he accepted only after making one request. I won't chair a room where only professionals have a voice. He looked around the table. Save seats for the people who lived through the mistakes. The request passed without objection. 3 weeks later, Caleb and Miles returned to the lakeside diner. The morning sunlight reflected across Cedar Lake just as it had before everything changed. Helen Brooks met them at the door with a warm smile. I've been waiting for you. She led them to the same table by the window. This time, no one questioned where they sat. Before breakfast arrived, Amos slowly approached using his wheelchair. In his hands was a small wooden box. "I think this belongs with your family." Miles carefully opened it. Inside rested the silver pocket watch. The cracked glass had been replaced. The worn leather strap had been stitched by hand. Amos smiled. "I couldn't fix what happened that morning." He looked at Caleb. "But I could fix this." Miles opened the cover. Tick, tick, tick. He looked at his father and smiled. "It sounds louder again." Caleb laughed softly. "No." He rested a hand on his son's shoulder. "We're just listening better." Outside the diner window, Noah crossed Main Street in uniform. He noticed Caleb. For a brief moment, the two men simply nodded to each other. No words were needed. Some victories weren't measured by who won an argument. They were measured by who chose honesty when silence would have been easier. As Caleb and Miles finished breakfast, sunlight filled the little diner once more. The pocket watch rested between them, still ticking, still reminding them that dignity cannot be taken away by a pair of handcuffs, that courage often begins with ordinary people refusing to look the other way, and that justice rarely arrives because one powerful person makes a phone call. It begins when someone decides another person's truth is worth protecting, even before they know who that person is. If this story touched your heart, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Please leave a comment below. When Miles placed his grandfather's repaired pocket watch on that same diner table, it wasn't just a family keepsake anymore. It had become proof that even after fear, misunderstanding, and injustice, time can still carry us toward what is right if we refuse to stop listening. This story reminds us that one moment of quiet courage can change far more than we ever imagine. Noah's decision to keep his camera recording didn't erase the wrong that had been done, but it gave the truth a chance to be seen when it mattered most. Today, think of one moment when you could choose to speak up instead of looking away. The next time you witness someone being treated unfairly, remember what Caleb stood for, and know that your small decision might become the turning point in someone else's story. If Caleb and Miles's journey meant something to you, comment 1 below, and tell me this. Have you ever seen someone do the right thing, even when it came at a personal cost? I'd truly love to read your story. Stay with us, because the next story will remind us that sometimes the greatest act of courage begins with a promise that seems impossible to keep.